Dr. Jairaj's Literary Lens presents Part 1, After Theory, Lecture 7, Native American Critical Race Theory, a Framework for Addressing Indigenous Injustices. This lecture is prepared and presented by Dr. S. Joseph Arul Jairaj, former head and associate professor of English, St. Joseph's College Autonomous, Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, India. Introduction. Critical race theory analyzes how race and systemic racism shape laws, institutions, and societies. While critical race theory emerged in the 1970s to examine racial inequality in the United States, Native American critical race theory adapts this framework to address the unique struggles of indigenous peoples. Native American critical race theory emphasizes historical trauma, colonization, and the fight for sovereignty. This talk explores Native American critical race theory's origins, its key ideas, and how it applies to modern issues. Critical race theory is a framework developed in the 1970s and 1980s by legal scholars such as Derrick and Kimberlé Crenshaw. It examines how race and racism are embedded in laws, institutions, and social systems. While critical race theory originally focused on African American experiences, it has since expanded. One important development is the adaptation of critical race theory to Native American contexts, referred to in academic circles as Native American critical race theory. This version of critical race theory focuses on the unique experiences of indigenous peoples in the United States, including colonization, genocide, land dispossession, and cultural erasure. This talk explores how Native American critical race theory is implemented in literature. It looks at how indigenous authors use storytelling to challenge colonial narratives, reclaim identity, and expose systemic racism. It includes examples from novels, poems, and memoirs that reflect key ideas of Native American critical race theory, such as tribal sovereignty, historical trauma, and resistance. By analyzing these texts, we can better understand how literature becomes a tool for justice and healing. Theory. Understanding critical race theory and its foundations. Critical race theory began in the 1970s as a response to the limitations of civil rights law. Scholars like Kimberlé Crenshaw and Derrick argued that racism is not an isolated problem, but is embedded in legal and social systems. Baltas et al., 121. Critical race theory challenges the idea that equality will be achieved automatically, and instead highlights how systemic barriers persist. However, critical race theory often focuses on African American experiences, leaving indigenous perspectives underrepresented. This gap inspired the creation of Native American critical race theory. Native American critical race theory, origins, and core principles. Native American critical race theory builds on critical race theory but centers the experiences of Native Americans. Scholars like Jody A. Bird argue that Native American critical race theory goes beyond analyzing racism to addressing cultural genocide and the theft of indigenous lands. Bird 45. Unlike critical race theory, which often treats race as a social construct, Native American critical race theory emphasizes the violence of colonization and the erasure of indigenous identities. It combines legal analysis with cultural preservation, advocating for tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Bird 67. Key concepts in Native American critical race theory. Native American critical race theory is guided by several core ideas: colonization and historical trauma. Native American critical race theory traces systemic racism to European colonization, which destroyed indigenous societies. For example, boarding schools in the 1800s forced Native children to abandon their languages and cultures, causing intergenerational trauma. Batiste 89. Sovereignty and land rights. Native American critical race theory highlights the importance of tribal sovereignty, or the right of Native nations to govern themselves. The 1924 Indian Citizenship Act granted citizenship to Native Americans, but ignored their sovereignty. Today, issues like land treaties and resource extraction remain central. Smith 23. Cultural genocide. Native American critical race theory critiques policies that erase indigenous cultures, such as the 1978 Indian Child Welfare Act. This law aimed to protect Native children, but often led to their removal from families, disrupting community ties. Hale, 102. Applications of Native American critical race theory in contemporary issues. Native American critical race theory helps analyze modern challenges facing Native communities. Environmental justice. Tribal lands often suffer from pollution due to mining and drilling. Native American critical race theory links these issues to colonialism's legacy, advocating for indigenous control over natural resources. Tisiak, 56. Legal battles. Native American critical race theory supports efforts to affirm tribal jurisdiction, such as the 2020 Violence Against Women Act, which expanded tribal authority to prosecute non-Native offenders. Byrd, 112. Education and representation. Native American critical race theory challenges the exclusion of indigenous stories in curricula. Scholars like Linda Tuhiwai Smith argue that education systems must decolonize to honor Native knowledge. Smith, 78. Practice. How is Native American critical race theory embedded in literature? What is Native American critical race theory? Native American critical race theory is not a separate academic field, but an adaptation of critical race theory that centers Native American experiences. According to scholars like Robert A. Williams, Jr., Native American critical race theory emphasizes the impacts of colonialism and the ongoing struggle for tribal sovereignty. Williams, 45. Unlike mainstream critical race theory, which often centers Black and Latino experiences, Native American critical race theory argues that Native peoples face unique forms of oppression because they are both racially marginalized and politically distinct nations within the U.S. Garout, 112. Key ideas in Native American critical race theory include historical trauma, the long-term emotional and psychological harm caused by genocide, forced removal, and boarding schools. Colonial narratives, stories created by colonizers that portray Native people as vanishing, savage, or noble. Resilience and resistance, the ways Native communities survive and fight against oppression. Tribal sovereignty, the right of Native nations to govern themselves and protect their cultures. Native American critical race theory uses these concepts to question how power and race operate in American society. Literature becomes a powerful space to apply this theory because stories can challenge harmful myths and give voice to indigenous perspectives. Challenging colonial narratives in literature. Native American critical race theory is used in literature by challenging colonial myths. For centuries, Native Americans have been misrepresented in books, movies, and history textbooks. They are often shown as one-dimensional characters, either violent enemies or mystical figures connected to nature. Native American critical race theory-informed literature seeks to replace these false images with real, complex Native lives. For example, in There by Tommy Orange, the author presents multiple Native characters living in urban Oakland, California. Orange 3. Most of them are not on reservations. This challenges the stereotype that Native people only live in the past or in remote rural areas. The novel also shows the characters dealing with poverty, addiction, and identity struggles, problems linked to historical trauma from colonization and forced assimilation. Orange writes, "We are the memories we don't remember." Orange 5. This line reflects how historical trauma affects Native people even when they do not know the full history. By showing this pain, There uses Native American critical race theory to explain how racism is not just individual prejudice, but it's built into history and society. Another example is Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. The novel tells the story of Tayo, a mixed-race Laguna Pueblo man returning from World War II. Tayo suffers from what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder, which is linked to both the war and his childhood experiences of racism. In the book, healing comes not from Western medicine, but from traditional indigenous ceremonies. This pushes back against the idea that Western knowledge is superior, a key goal of Native American critical race theory. As scholar Elizabeth Cook Lynn explains, Native writers use storytelling to decolonize the mind and restore cultural pride, Cook Lynn 78. This means replacing colonial myths with indigenous truths, highlighting tribal sovereignty and identity. Another major theme in Native American critical race theory literature is tribal sovereignty, the right of Native nations to govern themselves. Many Indigenous authors write about laws and court cases that have damaged tribal power, such as the Indian Removal Act or the termination policies of the 1950s. In The Round House by Louise Erdrich, the main character, Joe, is a 13-year-old boy on a North Dakota reservation. His mother is raped, but because of complicated tribal and federal laws, it is unclear who has the authority to prosecute the attacker. Erdrich 45. This story is based on real legal problems faced by Native women, who are murdered or assaulted at much higher rates than other groups, and often with no legal consequences for the attackers. Bubar et al. 106. Erdrich uses fiction to show how racism is built into legal systems. This is a core idea in Native American critical race theory, that laws can be tools of oppression, not just protection. By telling Joe's story, Erdrich calls for legal reform and greater tribal authority over crimes on Native land. The book also explores Joe's journey to understand his identity. As he searches for justice, he learns more about his culture, traditions, and community. This personal growth reflects another Native American critical race theory idea, that reclaiming identity is a form of resistance. Using literature for healing and resistance. Native American critical race theory also sees literature as a form of healing. Generations of Native people have suffered from trauma caused by forced assimilation, boarding schools, and loss of language. Storytelling becomes a way to recover what was lost. Poets like Joy Harjo, the first Native American U.S. Poet Laureate, use their words to reconnect with ancestors and traditions. In her poem, Remember, Harjo writes, "Remember the sky that you were born under." Harjo 1. The poem urges Native people to remember their roots, families, and connection to the earth. This act of remembering is powerful. As Harjo says in an interview, "Poetry is a way to survive." Harjo, Poet Laureate. Memoirs and autobiographies also play a role. In Heartberries by Therese Marie Mailhot, the author shares her struggles with mental illness, abuse, and displacement. Mailhot 22. But she writes in a bold, poetic style that refuses to follow Western rules of storytelling. This form of writing resists colonial expectations and claims space for Native women's voices. As scholar Leanne Howe explains, Native storytelling often values circular time, community, and emotion over logic and linearity. Howe 56. When Native authors break traditional Western writing rules, they are practicing resistance. This is a key part of Native American critical race theory in literature. Conclusion. Native American critical race theory offers a powerful lens to understand the intersection of race, colonization, and systemic injustice. By focusing on sovereignty and cultural survival, Native American critical race theory expands critical race theory to address the specific needs of Indigenous peoples. It reminds us that Indigenous resilience is central to justice, and that true change requires more than legal reforms. It demands the reclamation of history, land, and identity. Native American critical race theory is a powerful tool for understanding racism and colonialism in the United States. When applied to literature, it helps us see how Indigenous authors challenge stereotypes, claim sovereignty, and heal from trauma. Books like There, Ceremony, and The Roundhouse do more than tell stories. They educate, resist, and restore dignity. Through novels, poems, and memoirs, Native writers use Native American critical race theory to show that racism is not just about individual acts of hate. It is built into history, laws, and culture. But literature also shows hope. As long as Native voices are heard, there is a chance for change, justice, and healing. Thank you.